Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the regular board meeting of the Utah Transit Authority Board of Trustees. Today's Wednesday, April the 29th, and we're doing this all electronic as in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, and appreciate your participation today as we stream live and have our participation also through our WebEx portal. We will forego the Pledge of Allegiance out of respect and limited ability to do so, but certainly pay respect to our country and certainly all those who are serving to get us back to a healthy and well state. But let us begin first with our Safety First minute, and we'll have our Safety Director, Sheldon Shaw, give that message. Good morning, Sheldon.
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. Appreciate the opportunity as always. For the safety message for this week, I chose keeping an eye on your mental health. It's been a stressful situation for everyone here, and for our families, and for those trying to take care of the COVID situation here. And so, how do you know if you're having an issue or friends and family are? Look for mood swings, fatigue, insomnia, preoccupation with work problems, feeling overwhelmed, and hopefully not substance abuse, and that's something to be concerned about too. What can we do? We need to look for someone to talk to, someone who can give you some objective feedback and advice and support and encouragement. It could be a friend or a coworker. Also here internally, we have a continuous improvement group who can help your department or individuals work out a better situation for their work and still accomplish what they need to. And finally, we have an employee assistance program in Blomquist Tail that we can refer employees to or make a call ourselves. And finally, be safe and social distance. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Sheldon. We appreciate it. It's a great message and very timely. Would also note that our public comment has been received electronically. That was distributed to the Board of Trustees prior to this meeting, and we certainly welcome any comments or feedback that others want to submit through our website. With that, we'll move to item number 3, which is our consent agenda, and it includes the approval of minutes from a prior board meeting. I'll turn to my 2 colleagues and entertain a motion to that effect.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the minutes of our previous meeting.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. We'll next turn to our agency report with our Executive Director, Carolyn Gunott. And good morning, Carolyn. Welcome.
Good morning. Just a little bit. I'm not giving a ridership report today. Next week on May 6th, we'll give sort of a month-long report since we've had the restructuring of our service during this time frame. So next week we'll have a little more detailed information on ridership. Just I want to talk a little bit about service choices updates, a fairly brief agency report. But we did initiate a significant public engagement process in spring 2019 called Service Choices, which was to solicit public input on how UTA should prioritize its resources for bus services. And over 3,500 people provided input. And the feedback was used to redesign UTA's bus network and plan how new services could be implemented as the resources were allowed. The coronavirus pandemic has caused UTA to pause and reevaluate these plans as we've pulled back some of our service, and travel patterns have changed. And we don't know whether that's, at least for a while, it's semi-permanent during this time frame. Transit agencies across the nation are finding themselves in new territory. Almost universally, they have cut service in response to a shortage of labor, decreased ridership, and a strategy to reduce exposure for their operators. We have been very blessed here in the sense that our workforce is still here. They've remained relatively healthy. We've only had a couple of positive cases compared to other areas of the country right now in terms of service. And we're very happy that we still have a decent amount of ridership compared to most transit agencies. Right now, we're roughly running about 30% of our ridership is still there, and we're serving about 40,000 trips a day, which is quite a lot compared to other parts of the country. But the next step for all of us as transit agencies to plan for how and when we restore service, and that's each individually dependent on how that area and that region of the country continues to open up. We do know we're starting to open up fairly quickly. So what happens next is what we're starting to look at. We have a small internal task force looking at how we're returning our service. I'm back. Laura Hansen, who has been the project manager for this, had sent me a quote or mentioned a quote from the New York City transportation planner, is that when you clean your desk at work, you take everything off and then only you put back what you need. And we have a similar opportunity to decide what to put back on our city streets in response to as we move forward in this pandemic. And as the governor's economic recovery plan moves forward, people come back to work, we'll be putting the service that matches that. There's still a push for people to stay working from home as long as possible, and we realize that and we appreciate that. But we do understand we might have continued need for our services. We'll be continuing to take a look at that. We are in a fortunate position because we did service choices. And when we've done a lot of this as a very significant planning exercise, we're prepared to move forward as to how we bring back our service. We know what our priorities are in the region. And now we'll have new data from this period, which helps us better understand who we're serving as the public transit and who our essential riders are right now and how we would continue to serve. We will be doing some surveys and trying to make some determinations about that as well. But our plan is to reevaluate our bus network plan, adjust based on the new data, and implement good changes as we restore service. This may take time, and the service restoration will follow the health of the economy. Just to know that we are really continuing to monitor what is going on, not just at the state level, but each individual county and the county's economic recovery task force efforts as well. So I just want to give you sort of an update of what we're doing. We will be giving an update to the local advisory council as well. It is important that they do, I guess, adopt or approve a service plan as well over 2.5 years by statute. So we are looking at this fall. So we will continue to take a look at that and have them approve a service plan for 2021 to 2023, plus a vision list as well. And that would be really geared, working on that 5-year service plan. But just want to give you an update. Laura is here as well to answer any questions from the board at this time regarding our service choices update and how we plan on using those efforts that the staff has done to date, which has been really great. We're in the middle of looking at implementing it, and this has made a little bit of a halt, but that information is going to serve us well moving forward.
Yeah, I maybe had a question for Laura. Laura, and by the way, you have a very great staff, and I know when we made these adjustments initially, they did a pretty significant effort to get us there. So you don't very often get a sort of a clean slate. So, and I take clean slate kind of loosely because it's truly not clean, but there is a new norm, and I don't think any of us know what that new norm looks like. But are there some things that, if you were, since you have sort of a clean slate, that you would do a little differently than maybe we had been thinking about based on historic routes and trends and those kinds of things? Does this sort of just reset the creative thinking of your staff and looking at how you do that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will pass along the compliments to my staff. They have worked very hard, and so I know they'll appreciate you acknowledging that. This is an interesting time, and I think that we will probably wait and watch the data before we make a lot of decisions about what we might change and what we might keep. An interesting thing, however, during this period is that we've really noticed some of our most productive routes historically have been kind of duds lately, because a lot of the people who were using them were the typical 9-to-5 commuters, and then some of our other routes have really emerged as the workhorses of our system, primarily State Street, Redwood Road, 35th South. Some of these corridors have really emerged as kind of the backbone of our bus system and carrying a lot of people that work shift jobs, some of our essential workers. And so it's highlighted for us some changes in who is using the different routes and which markets we're serving. And so I think we'll continue to watch the data to see which routes start to get more service. But I think this is a unique opportunity for us to take a look at the whole system and say, okay, if we have this clean slate, what should we put back on our city streets, as that quote that Carolyn mentioned earlier? Which services do we want to prioritize? And we have a chance to talk about, okay, what are some new creative ways of meeting our coverage needs? And maybe we have an opportunity to really focus our mass transit bus service on those most productive corridors that are carrying essential workers. So it's a unique opportunity, and I think we're excited for this chance. It's obviously a challenge, but I think there's a lot of positives that can come out of this for the agency.
Thank you. Questions from my colleagues?
I have a question, Laura. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate all the work and effort that went into this, and now you get to kind of do a little pivot. So I think that's an interesting opportunity. You mentioned some routes that you're finding that are the workhorses, and most of them sound like they're in Salt Lake County. And I'm going to just kind of make an assumption. You're looking at those from other perspectives in other counties as well, I would assume. Is that correct?
Of course, yes, of course. The Route 850 has been tremendous in Utah County, and up in Davis County, right in downtown Ogden, we have our continued services there. The 470 is a unique route. It goes a long distance, but boy, it's productive. It carries a lot of people to lots of different places. And so I think we'll be emerging, we'll be looking at those different corridors throughout our service area and say, okay, which do we want to elevate and maybe make them more frequent so that they work even better for people.
Thank you. And then I had another question about growth and working with communities that are, I recognize that its growth is not now the priority of any of the communities, deservedly so, as they're dealing with the challenges of dealing with COVID-19. But structurally, are we still communicating with those communities and at least trying to kind of get an understanding of what maybe growth patterns are still in play or other components of that?
Absolutely. My job as a planner is a unique because everyone is so focused on the now and what are the challenges of today. And the nature of my work typically is looking 5, 10, 30 years into the future. And so we're continuing to have those conversations. We have a number of ongoing efforts thinking about, okay, we're going to emerge on the other side of this at some point. What are our needs going to be in the future? And, we're really looking at what is the next generation going to need in terms of transit service to keep this region growing and moving. And so I get a unique and lucky position to be able to think far into the future beyond this current crisis about how we can position ourselves best for a strong region moving forward.
Thanks, Laura. You are definitely the best person in this role for sure. So thank you, and thanks to your staff.
I might just give a case in point to that, Beth. We're undergoing a study right now, the western part of Utah County with Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs, and Laura's very much involved in that effort to look into the future and figure out how we can provide the service that's needed there. So that's being done right now. And so we're kind of taking advantage of a lull right now to rethink that. But that's one of the areas specifically that Laura is working on to help us look into the future. So we do appreciate the effort that's being made there.
So I do want to let people know that we do have or the board know that we are working internally. Laura is a big part of that as well. Just looking in general through a task force at sort of how we would bring our service back on. Planning is a big part of that, but so is our communications piece, the understanding the customer experience, what people are looking for when if they consider using transit in the future, in the near term as well. And we're also working closely. So we do have a group, and Lauren Simpson is helping moderate a very small working group in that area, and as well as some business analytics as well that we're taking a look at. So we will be coming back to the board over the next couple months, continuing to share information as to how we move forward. And there's a lot of information out there that's being done quickly, research-wise, in the industry as well. But as you know, each market in each area is very different. So we'll continue to focus on those aspects that we're taking that are specific to our economy and how we're going to pick up service and how people will need to use transit in the future.
Thank you, Carolyn. I will also say that I appreciate our reaching out and involving our advisory council. I think as we go forward in the thought processes and decision making, not only do they have an important role in their statutory aspect, but certainly in their breadth and their involvement in the communities at large. I think that's going to be important as we come to some conclusions. So, thank you. Did you have other items on your?
No, the only other item I wanted to let you know is that we are going to be out in the community. Probably, I was just checking with Andrea Packard, Director of Communications, Marketing Communications, to see where we might be. It looks like we'll be out in the community in the next 1 or 2 days, handing out masks in our sort of high utilized areas and transit centers. And so if you do hear about that, we'll let you know which areas of your communities that we will be in, just to let you know. Thanking people for riding with us and to be safe, and with a little card describing the safe, how to be safe on transit as well.
Yeah, we'd welcome that opportunity to help in that effort if that presents itself. That'd be great.
Thank you. I concur. That would be, we'd be happy to help in any way. Do you have will they be sending us a little outline of where they're going to be at and various other things as well? Will they be able to have that to us?
They're working on that, finalizing it now, so I couldn't provide it, but I will. We'll be getting that, but I wanted to let you know because it will occur before our next board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Carolyn. We'll move on then to our government relations report, and have our government relations director, Cheryl Bishop, with us. And Cheryl, I understand the legislature's met a couple times in a similar way, and then we may have some federal information you may also want to share.
Yeah, so the last 2 weeks, you can hear me, right? I'm okay?
Yes, you're
okay.
great.
The last 2 weeks they were in special session, a virtual special session, which was actually somewhat entertaining when they didn't realize they were not muted. but what they passed about 20 bills, one of which kind of could affect us is Representative Ferry's bill. It was HB 3008, the rail fuel sales tax amendments. That bill passed in the regular session and was vetoed by the governor. And rather than override the veto, they made some tweaks, and just some minor tweaks in the bill. What the bill does, it repeals a fuel tax credit, a credit that rail had received, and that puts that money in a special fund within the TTIF, which then the legislature can appropriate, and we can possibly it goes to that they appropriate now go towards rail crossing upgrades and things like that, which we could benefit from in the future. Also, there's on the federal level, there is talk of a fourth stimulus package. It's still undetermined what will actually be included in that stimulus package. There's quite a lot of debate. We were originally told that the Congress would be going back in session next week. Right now, I'm hearing that the Senate will be meeting, probably doing some judicial nomination votes. But other than that, the House, the latest I've heard this morning is that the House won't be meeting next week. I'm not sure when they'll be coming back in session. Also, we're anticipating a May interim session on the state level, again, going back and forth. But and then during that interim, we'll be looking for assignments as far as the master study list. There's also talk once the tax commission receives their numbers of possibly another special session. So we'll continue to monitor that and monitor what happens. But we continue to remain close with UAC, with the league, with their chambers, and making sure that we're involved and up to date. So that is my report. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I did have maybe a couple, Shul. We had some bills that were just sort of functional bills that, as we went into the session, got hit by the sort of lack of understanding about the subject matter and maybe even some of the parameters of those bills. And we had talked about maybe going back in interim and at least being able to give background and an explanation and reintroduce those bills. Will there be, you think, an interim format that will allow us to maybe go back and make some presentations and outline sort of the dilemmas that or challenges that we were hoping to improve?
Well, I'm assuming that we'll find that out in May.
Okay. We ought to try to prepare. I'm hoping that at some point they'll allow some level of presentation or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me turn to my colleagues. Do either of you have any questions?
Mr. Chair, Shul, I just had a question. When do you anticipate, when does the state anticipate that they're going to get their numbers to know kind of what the breadth of the impacts will be? I know normally they wouldn't have April anytime soon, but I'm wondering if they're trying to kind of figure that out strategically, or if it's just going to go normal process.
Well, from what I've heard, it's probably June, but I'm not sure. But
so kind of normal. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I don't have anything, Carlton.
Okay, great. Well, Shul, thank you, and thanks for your work. And I'm sure this is, from our government relations, this has certainly been an unusual time for you.
Yeah.
So thanks for your efforts.
Yep.
Good. Well, we'll next then go to our pension committee report, and Kent Millington from our board represents us on that committee. Kent, do you want to give an overview of where we are on our pension and things?
Yes, thank you. There's a couple of issues that I'd like to at least highlight. First of all is the monthly activity of both contributions and withdrawals from our pension fund, and then to talk about the effect of the market swing that we've seen as a result of this COVID-19 problem. So let's talk just briefly about the monthly activity. The actual monthly activity of contributions and withdrawals continues apace. It's very positive. We're contributing a little more than what is being withdrawn, and so that activity is normal and continues to provide the benefit to our pensioners and the contributions that are being made by our active workers. So that part of the pension committee was reassuring, because that activity continues in good stead. Now the problem that we're facing in the pension committee right now is the real significant market swing. If you go to the next slide, you can take a look at this slide. The bottom slides, the bottom figures there are for the year 2019. You'll notice that in every instance, every category of market activity, they were positive in 2019. And so at the last pension committee meeting that we had early in the year, I was able to report some very positive results. Now, the top figures are for the the first quarter of 2020. And you'll notice that almost all those categories are negative, and even those that are positive are very, very small. And so the market activity was very unusual for the quarter. In fact, go to the next slide. There's a lot of activity here and a lot of numbers, but if you look under the category, the column that says 2020, almost all of those categories of bonds and small and large cap values are negative. As a result, we have seen a real significant shift in the total amount of assets that we have in our pension fund. In fact, at the end of 2019, we were able to record and report that we'd had a very significant increase in our pension fund. Almost all of that has been wiped out in the first quarter of 2020. Go to the next slide, if you would, please. This is an unusual graph that shows the effect and the length of time of various bear markets in the history of the United States. Notice that many of those shifts take 2 or even 3 years to decline. Now, if you would look at the dark blue line to the left of the graph, that's how fast this market has declined. It declined in about 30 days. What usually takes a year or two in a bear market, we did see in just a very, very short time. And go to the next slide. This is the both bull and bear markets for the last 20 years or so. And if you look right at the bottom of each, on the left-hand side, it shows the bull markets. The last 2 rows, from December of 2018 through February of 2020, the market rose 33%. So over that 13, 14 months, something like that, there was a very significant increase that we then reported in the early part of this year, because 2019 was a very favorable year. However, if you look straight across there at the last entry in the bear market, it shows from February the 12th of 2020 to March the 23rd, about 5 weeks. That entire increase of 15 months from 2018 to 2020 was wiped out in 5 weeks. There was a 33% decline in the market. And then notice from March the 23rd to April the 17th of 2020, there's a 25% increase. So there's been a significant volatility in the market as a result of this COVID-19. In fact, the month of March has some very interesting anomalies, and it impacts our pension fund, of course. Of the top 10 bear market days ever in the stock market, 2 of those days were recorded in March of 2020. And of the top 10 bull market days in the market, 2 of those days were in March of 2020. So we have 2 of the worst days and 2 of the best days in the marketplace. As a result of that, our pension fund managers, are monitoring very carefully these swings in the marketplace and very strategically taking some gains and reinvesting the funds and repositioning our pension fund just a little bit. But the overall impact has been a fairly significant decline in the pension amounts, all of that coming from unrealized gains and losses, in this case losses in the last few months. But the normal basic activity of our pension fund is good. The market activity that we've all been familiar with has impacted our pension fund. We are at the moment where we were at the end of 2018. So the gains from 2019 have been erased, but yet we've still yet to see how this will all work out as we go forward. But the pension fund is still good, still very strong. The activity is increasing among our currently active employees, and our pensioners are receiving their pensions as appropriate. So that's the report we have, available for any questions you may have.
Kent, first of all, thank you for your service there. I was just doing really poor arithmetic in my mind, but it's still, on most categories, it seemed like even though the returns weren't what you'd want in a long-term profile, we still netted out on a positive basis on most of those investments if you net out
Yes.
the years. And which actually was
That's actually what's happened.
I was expecting actually worse, but not you couldn't. It wouldn't be a good long-term strategy, but it also kind of behooves us to sort of take those strategic adjustments that you mentioned at the end and be a little bit patient through this process with this as well. I'm guessing.
Yes, and that was the report that the Cambridge Associates gave us. Was they've made some modest adjustments to the investments, but they're confident about coming out of this thing, and they feel like we're in a very strong position as we move forward. None of us like to see the kind of decline we've had in the last month, or the last couple of months. But they're quite optimistic about the future.
Kent, did they have any data or any, not data perhaps, but any thoughts on, obviously April isn't yet officially completed, and April had the bulk of the unemployment filings. Does that have any impacts? And do they anticipate that this is the worst of it, or is it kind of just too impossible to predict right now?
Well, they're indicating that it's very difficult to predict what will happen in the future, but they were not particularly off-put by the unemployment because the market still is fairly stabilized with the federal government's relief package that was passed. And so the market has stabilized a little bit. We'll see what happens as we move forward. But they're encouraging patience, and they're watching it very carefully, the movements of the market.
Thank you.
So that's the report that I have. Good activity, a nail biter in the marketplace, but we'll just keep watching it very carefully.
Thanks again, Ken, for that report. And again, we appreciate your service there. On the line of investments, we'll turn to Bob Biles to give us our investment report for the first quarter of 2020.
Thank you, Mr.
Good morning,
Chair.
Bob.
Good morning. This report is a required report under your financial management policy. At the end of every quarter for the investments I'm in charge of, I report back to the board. So we'll go, you receive some information, but we'll just go through the actual investments at March 31st. We really didn't buy any or sell any investments. We put our investments into more liquid areas. PTIF is available on a pretty quick basis, as is the Zion's Bank $12 million. The Zion Capital Advisors at the top of this chart is invested up to 3 years maturity. So you can look at the yields here. That kind of reflects the maturities too, with Zions Capital Advisors being up to 3 years. That yields at 2.19. Zions Bank is overnight money. For the money we have at Zions Bank, that's for payroll, accounts payable, and reflects our revenues as they come in. So at March 31st, we had a little bit over 12 million, and that yield was just over 0.25%. And then PTIF, the 273 million, their maximum maturity is 270 days. Overall, our portfolio averaged about 1.66%. That's the average as of March 31st. And again, we didn't have any direct investments in this particular quarter. Go to the next slide.
Bob, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
On the PTIF, I'm always actually impressed that the rate of return for the liquidity of that is as good as it is. Is April as optimistic of a month? Are we likely to see similar kinds of things?
Yeah, so when I get to the next slide, it'll be interesting to see the impact from January, February, and March for the PTIF. Because it's shorter maturity, you can see it dropped from 2.2% in January and then 2.1% in February, and March was 1.66%. And so that had a much more dramatic effect than it did on Zions Capital, because that's invested out a longer term. And then when we do our own investments, we're out in the 4 to 5 year maturity space. But I've chosen not to do any any investments there. It's turned out to be a good thing for us. We just want to be highly liquid. And as we've entered into the current situation with COVID-19, liquidity is really important. And so it wasn't what we were shooting for, but it's turned out to be a good decision. So then you can look at this compared to the benchmark returns. You can see the effect there also. And so the PTIF's out there in that March space of 0.65%. And so that dramatically affected their yield in March. Zions isn't necessarily working in that 3-month T-bill space. And so they were, they actually went up just a little bit. But for each of the months, we're significantly over the benchmark returns, and I expect we will be for some time. The 3-month T-bill is pretty low right now. So that's the quarterly investment report. Didn't know if you had other questions.
Any questions for my colleagues? Doesn't look like it, Bob. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that brings us to a discussion that we had a little bit previously on our reserves, and so we're going to have a follow-up discussion to that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is follow-up to discussion you had on April 8th. At that time, we reviewed at your direction. Well, let me start over. Last July, the board established various reserves and said, we are establishing these reserves in our policy, but we want to come back and look at it after we've had some history. So on April 8th, we came back and presented that history and some of the issues that had come up in that time frame relating to our general operating reserve, that we had gone through that in one instance. And the thought was that we should increase that reserve from 12% to 18%. Now, that doesn't require a change in your policy. With board action, you can go ahead and overfund these if you want to. So that's our recommendation right now, is that you take that from 12% to 18%. The other recommendation was to increase the capital replacement reserve. When we set this up last July, what we did is we took the current reserves we had and reallocated them. And so we put 10.7 million into that capital replacement reserve, but the goal was really to be closer to 45 million. And so the second action is to increase that reserve from 10.7 to $45 million. And where that money would come from is from our debt reduction reserve. We've been setting aside and it's a fairly unique policy, just to make sure everyone understands this. It's a fairly unique policy. UTA chose several years ago, whenever we do a refinancing of our debt, that we would capture those savings and put them into a reserve to consider reducing debt sometime in the future. So the debt that we had targeted was 2022, calling some of our 2012 bonds that have 5% coupons. In the last few months, in November and then this spring, we did several refinancings, achieved quite a large net present value savings, but that refinanced those 2012 5% coupon bonds. So the recommendation is to take money out of that debt reduction reserve to increase the general operating reserve to 18% and then to get the capital reserve up to 45 million. Getting the general operating up to 18% takes it from about 38.3 million to 57.6 million. And it would reduce the debt reduction from about 87.4 million to around $30 million. So we'd still have $30 million in there. This is just reallocation of the reserves. It isn't really changing how much we have in the reserves. And then the suggested action, if the board approves this, would be that I'd go ahead and make the transfer from the debt reduction into the general operation reserve immediately, because there are sufficient funds to do that. But then over the course of this year, as those quarterly refunding savings come in, make the transition to fill up that capital replacement reserve. So the requested action is that you would approve those changes, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Bob, I did have one question in regards to, we had a discussion on fuel hedging and the pluses and minuses. And right now, we've probably seen record lows on our fuel.
Not yet. There was a few.
Not yet record?
Not yet a record. A few years ago, we were paying $1 a gallon.
Oh, okay.
For diesel.
Oh, wow.
But we're getting close.
We're getting close. And that's obviously helped us because our revenues probably haven't been as high. But do you feel like if in those operating reserves, if fuel went the other direction, and it probably won't this year, substantially higher than where we budgeted, there would be enough in there, or enough of maybe this year's savings to offset a few future years increase that would sort of be unforeseeable?
Yes.
Or not, at least not foreseen at the time of budgeting.
Yeah, so in a normal year where you didn't have sizable revenue losses from passenger revenue and sales tax, in a normal year, if you have savings on fuel, and it depends on what else happens, right? There's so many moving parts, but assume fuel was the only thing that varied from what we had budgeted, those savings would automatically get carried forward in your cash balance into the next year. Whether you want to designate those and put some of that into a special reserve for fuel to handle our own fuel hedging, you could do that, but it should show up in that carry forward of the reserve into the next year.
I mean, on the long term, I would love to figure, I mean, since fuel is such a big part of our budget and also fairly unpredictable piece of it, and somehow in the long term, I would love to figure out a mechanism that gives us a little bit of flexibility on fuel prices. But
sure. So we did away with the fuel reserve that we put in place several years ago. We had a 30 cents per gallon that we put into a reserve. We could look at doing something like that also. You know, when we budget, we look ahead to the EIA forecast, and then adjust it for our area, and then add a few cents. So we put in a few cents hedge there, maybe 5 cents, not a lot.
Yeah.
But then, having this additional 30 cents, and that was about $2 million. We could look at reestablishing that reserve.
I'm going to have, it could even be added to the operating reserves, but with just an understanding of sort of where it came from.
Sure. So, this year is going to be an interesting budgeting year. I'm skipping ahead to budgeting with all the changes and the unknown of how revenues are going to react this year, what's going to happen to fuel. There's several expense lines that will be lower that we know of. There'll be some that are going to be higher with all the disinfecting and the steps we're taking to protect our employees as well as our customers. So budgeting for 2021 is going to be as different of a budget as I've ever worked on, I think.
Yeah. Questions from my colleagues, Bob?
I just had a question structurally in terms of if the goal is to as we're talking about the goal of increasing the funding to 18% for the operating reserve fund, and then increasing the increasing to $45 million, is the goal to keep the reserves at 30 million, or is there some other mechanism or structure that we're looking at to deal with those? Are we just going to keep that at 30 million? Is there a percentage? Is it some other component? How do we look at that?
Yeah, so it's not a percentage. The money comes into that debt reduction reserve historically two ways. We could budget money to go into there for debt reduction if we want to. It's typically been the refunding savings that we've achieved. So as we work on our long-term forecast, that's one of the things we'll be looking at is, can we continue to do that? Or do we need to use some of those savings to make sure we can continue with our operations? And so that shows up in our long-term forecast, and it's just one of the assumptions that we have to put into that forecast.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Oh, and I should mention that most of the savings, we've captured most of those savings from the 2015. And we're hitting a period now where the annual savings are less than $1 million. And then it picks back up again in the 2027 timeframe. You might remember that from the refunding that we did this in the last few months.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, if there's, unless there's, Ken, did you have any other questions? Or?
No, I don't have any questions.
Well, I would entertain a motion that would, kind of an intent motion, asking Bob or asking there be a resolution to establish these particular funds.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to
that resolution.
Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make a motion that we approve and authorize the debt reduction reserve and reallocation of reserved funds as outlined.
I second that.
I have a motion and a second asking for a resolution to be established to create those reserve funds. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay. Thanks, Bob. Do you need anything else on this item?
Nothing else on this item. Just mention, we're watching cash flows. And this is an important time to maintain cash. And we entered this period because of these reserves in a strong position. And with CARES funding, we hope to maintain that strong position for the next few years.
Well, thank you. And thanks to you and your staff for efforts in getting us through these times. That's been great. Well, let's then go on to a discussion on a UTA policy in regards to ethics. This is an update and some refinement of some policies and bringing together some older policies and updating them as well. And with that discussion, we'll turn to our Chief Internal Auditor, Rihanna DeVille. And Rihanna, welcome. And you want to give us a brief outline on this policy, and then we'll and then maybe mention how it will go out to employees.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and trustees. Thank you for this opportunity to talk through the policy. The ethics policy, it is reviewed on an annual basis to ensure it remains relevant and it aligns with UTA's objectives. Now, given that the last review and approval of this policy happened in May of last year, it is an appropriate time to reevaluate it. And as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, we did use this opportunity to identify other policies that are ethics related that would fit well with the ethics policy. And for that reason, we did incorporate the ethics hotline, the whistleblower protection, and the anti-fraud policies. This obviously supports a more streamlined policy. Now, I just wanted to highlight in terms of the ethics hotline, the important information that we included in this ethics policy was around the contact information for the hotline, and also how we would treat reports that are submitted through the hotline. There is a section on whistleblower protection, and that section makes it clear that no retaliation against an employee that reports a concern or a witness will be allowed. The policy also provides information on what constitutes fraud and what management's responsibilities are around fraud. It's also important to note that the policy does include that employees have to report any suspected fraud. So those are the three most important aspects of the previous policies that have been incorporated into this ethics policy. There are three important aspects of the policy that I wanted to highlight. It's around conflicts of interest, meals and gifts, and then around outside employment. On conflicts of interest, we've noted that employees have to avoid situations that create a conflict of interest, and also those situations that may create a perceived conflict. If an employer realizes that they have such a conflict, it has to be reported to that employee senior manager and also to the ethics officer for further action. The last part has been added to make sure that employees understand that their responsibility is to report it further up in their chain and also to the ethics officer. On meals and gifts, employees may not accept any meals from a vendor. There are exceptions, and those are when the meal is offered by a vendor during a meeting that UTA-related business is discussed. The cost of that meal should be less than $25 with a cumulative value of $50 from any specific vendor per 12-month calendar year, per 12-month rolling calendar year. Meals can also be accepted if it forms part of a conference or event in which that cost is included in the registration fee, or if the employee is asked by UTA to attend the conference or the event. A meal can also be accepted if there is a business meeting between UTA and entities such as a government entity or a professional or educational association, or an organization that does not respond to solicitations. In terms of gifts, the policy makes it now very clear that it is a criminal offense to accept a gift or a kickback from a vendor if it is done with the intent to be influenced or to influence. And even if it is not done with the intent to influence, employees may not accept a gift of any value from a vendor. What is good to understand, though, is items such as snacks or beverages or advertising materials of a nominal value, meaning less than $10, would not be considered a gift. The last aspect I wanted to bring to your attention is around outside employment. UTA regards outside employment when a UTA employee also has another employer. While outside employment is generally allowed, there are some restrictions around outside employment. As long as employees are aware of these restrictions, they are they are aware that there could be any actual perceived conflict of interest. Generally, it is accepted. In the event, though, that an employee does become aware that their outside employment is creating a conflict, that employee again has to report it to that employee senior manager and the ethics officer for further review. It also, the policy also includes a section now on prospective outside employment. Should an employee be interested in an outside employment with a prospective employer that are involved in any dealings with UTA, that employee has to recuse themselves from making any decisions or be part of any decisions that involves that prospective employer. This has been added to make it to give the employee more awareness of their role when they are dealing with a prospective employer. And then the last point I wanted to bring to your attention around outside employment is any outside employment, whether the employee believes it creates a conflict or not, has to be reported to that employee senior manager. That's the three aspects I wanted to bring to your attention. In terms of further steps, if the board approves this policy today, the policy will be formally communicated to all employees. Meaning that will be done via email, and also in printed copies will be made available at all our offices and operations. The next step would be to place this policy on our learning management system, where all employees will be expected to read and sign off on the policy. There will also be online training for all employees. And then lastly, apart from the online training, we will also be providing in-person training on the policy. And the aim of that in-person training will be to provide more practical application of the policy to employees. That is all I have from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Rihanna. Any questions from the board? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion for approval of this policy.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the policy, the UTA policy 1.1.11 for ethics as presented.
I second that.
A motion from Beth, seconded by Ken. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Rihanna. I know Mike Bell and from the AG's office and others worked, Carolyn worked very hard to get us to this point. So thank you, along with the rest of the staff. So appreciate that. That brings us to contracts, disbursements, and grants. And our first item up is a contract in regards to computer-aided dispatch and automatic vehicle location sole source contract with Telrace LLC. And we have Dan Harmuth and Alyssa Wixom here with us today. And good morning, Dan.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and trustees. As you mentioned, I also have the IT project manager, Alicia Wixom, with me to answer any questions I cannot. This sole source contract is for continuing the rewrite of the CAD AVL system, as you mentioned, which is part of a greater transit management system 5-year program rewrite. So the entire program includes the CAD AVL system, a software system rewrite. It includes the bus, mobile data computer, software and hardware rewrite, and the replacement of all the hardware. Adding front runner, mobile data devices in all the front runner trains, the software and the hardware. And the program also includes mobile data devices in the tracks as well, software and hardware. So this original system was developed about 14 years ago. This is a rewrite. The technology is outdated. It's end of life. And also the hardware that goes in the buses is really expensive. It's about $7,000 a bus. So this project is to reduce that expense per bus down south of $3,000. It may be around $2,000 to $3,000 per bus. So that's the entire program. This is just part of the program. So aside from just updating all the hardware and software, this program, rewriting the CAD AVL system and all the mobile data computers and all the hardware in the systems, is going to also improve the passenger data throughout our entire system, all the way out to the mobile devices, smartphones, and all the apps. So the data starts in the vehicles. The data starts in the CAD AVL system that actually goes out to the public. So rewriting this system in its entirety is going to improve our passenger data. So the sole source contract is adding 6,666 hours, and it's at an hourly rate of $30 an hour with this vendor. It's for a total of $199,980. There was a previous contract to this vendor last year for around $82,000 for the mapping portion of the CAD AVL system. So we wanted to have this vendor start with the mapping, and if they were successful, then we would add this other portion of the contract onto them. So Talrace has done an exceptional job. They've been on schedule, and the users have signed off and approved all the development that they've done so far. So this is now adding the rest of the functionality for the CAD AVL system. And the reason of the sole source is we want the same vendor that developed the mapping portion of the system to continue with all the other functionality of the system, but also that they're at a reasonable price of $30 an hour. So any other vendor in the marketplace charges over $100 an hour for this sort of development. So that's my briefing. I recommend approval of the sole source. And are there any questions for myself or Alicia?
I think the only question I had for you, Dan, and I think I remember this discussion back when we did the maps. We decided to create this system in-house because we didn't feel like there was an on-the-street system that did what we needed it to do. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a combination of that. We could actually develop this system to be customized to UTA and the processes and how we do our buses and the operators' experience and what functionality our TCC requires and all the operations. So we could actually develop custom. We've developed the system 14 years in the past. We've supported the system for 14 years, so we understand our own code. We just need to rewrite it. So it's going to cost us, we budgeted this for about $5 million for 5 years. And that includes all the hardware that's going in all the vehicles. If we were to bring in a third-party vendor, this would probably be 3 to 4 or 5 times more expensive to purchase an outside vendor. And then we would have to customize the system to actually meet UTA's functionality. So we briefed this to the exec team, and the exec team approved of us moving forward with this entire program of rewriting the system.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Dan, I had a question. How long is the lifespan of this as anticipated for this new design that they're doing?
This new system, so this portion of it, the CAD AVL system, probably the current one has lasted 14, 15 years. So we're developing this with the newest technology. It's cloud-based up in the Microsoft Azure cloud. And so we don't expect anything that could be locally, whether it's servers or versions of operating systems, to age the system out. Now it's going to be developed in tools and technology that Microsoft is going to keep current. So I probably would expect it to be 10 to 15 years as well.
Thank you.
Any
I have
questions?
a question. Who will own the intellectual property being created here?
So per the contract, UTA will own the intellectual property, and for the entire system and for all our MDCs as well, all the software. So UTA
Right.
will have that.
Good, thank you.
Dan, I'm sorry, I just had one other question. As we know, long term, we anticipate continued growth along the Wasatch Front. Are they going to be able to have easy incorporations of growth and new streets, et cetera? Is that going to be easy to incorporate as well? And that's within the time? Is it just the $30 an hour, or how does that work?
The system that's being developed is able to expand with more MDC, with more buses or trains or more information. This system also gets information from the trapeze planning system. So actually, a lot of the routes, all the routes and information about operators and all that kind of stuff initiates in our trapeze planning system, and it gets imported and used by this CAD AVL system and pushed out to the mobile data devices and computers that are in the buses and stuff like that. And in the actual vehicles, if the vehicles are disconnected from the system or from the internet, all the information that the operators need is local on those devices as well. Does that answer?
Thank you. It does. Thanks.
Unless there's other questions, I'll entertain a motion on this contract.
I make a motion that we approve this contract, sole source contract, as it has been explained.
Second.
Motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Dan, for that presentation. And thanks, Felicia, for being on
very much.
Standby. Our next item is a contract for the light rail SD100 low voltage power systems. And Eddie Cummins is with us, our Chief Operating Officer. Good morning, Eddie.
Good morning. I have Kyle Stockley with me today. If you have any questions you may have. This is a contract with LES Services Electrotechno Incorporated to replace the low voltage supply on 23 SD100 vehicles and 3 spares. The low voltage power supply is the component that provides power to the lighting system, HVAC, signs, radio communications, things of that nature on our light rail vehicles. This is a 2-year contract valued at $425,724. We plan to spend approximately $196,499 in 2020 and $229,236 in 2021. This procurement is part of our light rail overhaul program. And the low voltage power supply units right now that we have are approximately 20 years old and require a comprehensive midlife overhaul to allow them to continue in service for an additional 15 to 20 years. The midlife overall scope of work includes cleaning, disassembly, refurbishment, necessary repairs, minor paint touch-ups, and component replacement and testing. Additionally, under the terms of this agreement, the insulated gate bipolar transistors will be upgraded to a newer model. Are there any questions on this contract?
Thank you, Eddie. Any questions from my colleagues? I don't see any. With that, I would entertain a motion on this contract.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the light rail SD100 low voltage power supply overhaul with LES Services Electrotechno Incorporated.
Second.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded by Kent. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? No, motion passes. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you.
That next item up is a new design for bus stop signs with Intermountain Traffic Safety, and we'll go to our Chief Marketing and Communications Director, Nicole Bardo. This morning, Nicole.
Good morning. This contract is with Intermountain and Traffic Safety. for $297,877.32 for approximately 5,960 new bus stop signs throughout all three counties that we serve in our area. This would be for 5 years with 2 option years. The contract was a competitive RFP. We had 13 proposals, and Intermountain Traffic Safety was chosen based on past performance, price, and quality of their product. We would look for the first year to be $59,546. We would start this implementation of our new bus stop master plan and our new wayfinding. So with that, do you have any questions for me on this contract?
The one question I had, Nicole, and I very much like the look of the new signs, and I look forward to having them installed. At the very beginning, we had some discussion about maybe potential changes, modifications to service. How sort of portable are the signs, and can they be relocated fairly, with a fair amount of ease, if a route were to change or something were to be modified?
They are pretty easy to change out, and one of the things that we are doing is with planning and capital and customer experience, they're working really closely as how we move these along and where they're being placed. So as we work with our new, as you heard with Laura earlier, where we're locating these things, our first priority, they're prioritizing with service planning and capital is instituting them, but also they're not really hard to move in and out. We have a pilot program that went on Second South. We'll have to replace some of those because we did make some changes to the look based on ADA changes. So they're pretty simple. We've worked with facilities to change them out, and the location, and we're reducing how many we put out there as well. We have a lot. So those are all things that went into the wayfinding plan so that we can be a little more flexible because they are bigger and more visual in some areas. That's a good question.
Any questions?
Yeah,
Nicole, go ahead.
Let me go to Kent first and then Beth.
Nicole, I remember that some of the ADA suggestions on those bus stops had to do with the colors, the backgrounds, because of people with color blindness couldn't read the numbers. I'm assuming that's been taken into account. I think GJ had worked on that previously. Is that part of the ADA accommodations you were mentioning?
Absolutely. So that was we piloted those signs, and then we made sure that we changed those accommodations. So that's exactly what we did. It was
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Nicole, I had a question. Do you know structurally how they're going to implement this? For instance, when are they going to do, like, say, Ogden or, Kaysville or whatever, or anything? Do we have an idea of when they're going to roll this out? And if that's the case, I think I would like to be included and know what's going on so I can communicate with the area that I'm representing, and I think my colleagues as well. So if we could have some type of a structured timeline, that would be fantastic.
We absolutely can. As part of the bus stop master plan, we have a rollout. What we can do now, because we're in a different situation, is we need to look at how that works with the new restoration and the service plan that may be modified, and also timelines for manufacturing. So what I could come back with is give you a new timeline and see what has changed based on the COVID situation. So let me get with GJ and we can come back and look at what the new plan looks like, and then be able to give you all kind of what the priority locations are for that each county. So
Thanks, I appreciate that.
the master plan
sorry, go ahead.
Okay. The master plan is on the website that we had, but again, there may be some modifications due to the situation now. So, but we can definitely look at that and get you a current situation plan.
Thank you. I did have one other question. I noticed the contract is for 5 years. Do you anticipate getting everything completed within that timeline?
We do. That is our hope. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion then on this contract.
I make a
Mr. Chair,
motion that we approve the design bus stop signs with intermountain traffic safety.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth, to approve the contract. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Nicole. And thanks to your staff for that work on that. Item D is a change order for South Temple and Main Street curve replacement with our on-call maintenance task order number 102 with Stacy and Whitback. And I have Eddie Cummins and as well as Dave Hancock with us today. Good morning, gentlemen.
Thank you. Dave Hancock will be presenting this contract.
Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie, Chair, and trustees. And good morning. We are asking for approval for this task order. It's number 102 with Stacy and Whitbeck to replace the rail curve at South Temple and Main Street in Salt Lake City. The task order amount is for $705,257 and brings the total contract amount over the 3.5-year period to $35,952,066. The rail in this area has significant wear and has reached its useful life. The curve is currently 20 years old and is located in a high traffic area as the curve serves multiple routes. Additionally, this particular curve is subject to more extreme wear conditions due to the shape of the curve being similar to a 90-degree angle. The project scope includes demolishing the existing rail and concrete tubs as well as track replacement with a new encapsulated rail in concrete. The useful life of the new design is 20 to 25 years. Additionally, we will be adding rail lubricators in each direction to help with noise mitigation and rail wear. We will also be adding a guardrail to the curve, which will help if there ever was a derailment, it would help keep the wheels inside the flangeway area. If approved, this work is scheduled to be done over Memorial Day weekend, starting on Friday morning and ending on Tuesday morning after Memorial Day. Are there any questions?
Dave, I'm very familiar with this curve. I used to office by it, and when I went back to the office after city council meetings, I heard it. That would have been 10 or 15 years ago, so it's been challenged a little bit. But I'm sure that's just also a reflection of just that angle that you mentioned. One question I had is sort of this on-call contract. It's not that I don't think anything's wrong as far as how we gone forward with it, but was all this work anticipated when we went out to bid for this on-call maintenance contract, or it just seems like a lot of money to one firm that just becomes change orders, or are we rebidding that contract in the near future with a sort of a more definitive scope in mind, I guess is what I'm asking.
We are rebidding this contract this year. This contract goes through the end of the year, but we are preparing to put an RFP out in January and then have a new on-call contract starting, in January 2021. We will be working with the legal department to make sure that as we go out for an RFP that we do it the right way, and yeah, we'll be going out in July.
Eddie, did you have something you were saying?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think Dave misspoke when he first started there saying that we would go out with the RFP in January. It's actually July, but he caught it there at the end.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Eddie.
You're allowed one mistake, Dave. So, well, that's good. I mean, I have no problem if sort of in the scope of it, we tell them we're going to do this kind of amount of work, and all the firms sort of know that they're bidding on this contract gets them that work, providing their costs are in line. But anyway, I just want it to be as competitive as we can make it. So
yeah, and we did give them an amount. We said between 5 to 10 million a year in maintenance projects, specifically to do with special track work and curves and road replacement. So when we bid it out, it was very competitively bid. We had a good scope, and we have, of course, based on our SGR, based on our SGR, I guess, inspections, we have planned the work accordingly every year based on what gets rated that needs to be replaced.
Okay. And Stacy and Whitback's a great firm. I don't want to, I just know it's a lot of money that we put out to them. So, yeah. Any other questions on the change order? If not, how about I turn to Beth for this motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the change order for the South Temple and Main Street curb replacement, the on-call maintenance task order at 102 with Stacy and Whitback.
Second.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded from Kent. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, Eddie. Next item up is a revenue contract with Volkswagen Eligible Mitigation Action Funding Agreement with the Utah Department of Environmental Quality. And we have Mary Delaretto, our Chief Service Officer. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, everyone. This is a revenue contract with the State of Utah Department of Environmental Quality for the Volkswagen Mitigation Fund Award. We were awarded just over $13 million. I think it's $13,079,240 to be exact, to purchase 20 electric buses and the associated infrastructure. The award will pay for up to 65% of the eligible expenses, and the match for the vehicles is included in the approved 5-year capital plan. We have it programmed, I believe, in 2021. We are also looking for some grants through Rocky Mountain Power to help pay some of that local match as well for the infrastructure. Any questions on that?
I think we've discussed this one quite a bit over the last few months, but questions from my colleagues.
Just one question. I noticed in the contract that it's already identified all the vehicles. Is that's still the same? None of those vehicles that were damaged or taken out of this list. Is that right?
Correct. As far as I know, those are still the same ones we plan on destroying.
Thank you.
Kent, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. How about I turn to you, Kent, if you're willing?
Absolutely. I move that we approve this revenue contract, the Volkswagen Eligible Mitigation Action Funding Agreement with the Utah DEQ.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you, Mary. Looks like you're up still with a revenue contract for a professional service agreement for the design of the 650 South Main Street track station with the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City.
Yes, this is another revenue contract with Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency to fund UTA to oversee and hire a designer to construct the new track station at 650 South Main Street. I think we have a map to show you where that is located at. So the original north-south tracks plan had always projected that a future station would be needed at this location. And in anticipation of that future need, the tracks were constructed so we could accommodate that station and easily construct it in the future. Now that there's a lot of planned development and that area is growing, and so Salt Lake City and the Redevelopment Agency have asked us to move forward with the construction of that station. This contract is for just the design portion, and the city and RDA in association with the developers would also pay for the construction of that station. And right now the schedule is to get the designer on board this year and put it out for bid by the end of the year and have that construction next year. We have coordinated closely with our operations staff, and they do not think this will adversely affect the track schedule. And also no additional rail cars would be needed for this additional station. You'll see I think in Todd's presentation next, he will talk about the pre-procurement for that designer that we want to go out with as well. Are there any questions?
I will just say that when I did my newly elected officials training in 1997, they talked about the imminence of this track station opening up. So I guess in the scope of time, it's a small period, but been a few years, and I know a number of projects have come and gone. So it's nice to see this one actually come forward. I think it'll be a good addition to that community. Questions, however, to my colleagues? Or okay, good. Well, with that, I maybe would turn to Kent. Would you be willing to make a motion?
Were you turning to me on that?
Yeah, that was my attempt. Yeah.
Yes. I move that we approve this. What is? I guess this is a
revenue contract.
For the design of the 650 South Main Street track station with the RDA of Salt Lake City.
Okay.
Second.
I have a motion from Kent, seconded by Beth. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Mary. Thanks, everyone. That brings us to our pre-procurements with Todd Mills. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, trustees. We have several pre-procurements that we're ready to go out for bid on. The first one is the procurement to purchase 6 F-150 police package service vehicles with siren and lights upfitting. The trucks are preferred vehicles for our police department since they have the ground clearance and design necessary to access maintenance of way areas along our rail corridors and other facilities. With the purchase of these 6 vehicles, we'll retire 4 of our old cruisers and expand our fleet by 2 vehicles to meet the demands of new officers that were added in 2018. This procurement will be conducted as an IFB and awarded to the dealer with the lowest overall bid. Any questions on this one?
No.
Moving to the next one, this is a procurement to purchase parts to perform an overhaul on the doors for the SD 160 light rail vehicles as part of our state of good repair plan. There are 17 SD 160 vehicles with 8 doors on each vehicle for a total of 136 doors. The labor for this overhaul will be performed by in-house employees and will take approximately 2 years to complete. The parts will be sent out for bid to multiple vendors, and respondents may bid on one or multiple parts as they see fit. The order award will be per part number and will be based on lowest price and ability to meet the required delivery dates. Any questions on this one?
No. So it sounds like each part basically has a different piece to it. So it's not a one vendor gets all scenario.
Correct. There are several parts. I don't have the total number of parts, but there's several parts, and they'll go out to bid, and
okay.
They may all be awarded to different suppliers.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think there are any questions that I can see.
Okay. The next one is a procurement to purchase and replace the seating on all 117 light rail vehicles from the current foam and cloth seats to molded composite seats. This change will help UTA combat the COVID-19 pandemic, as the current seats require extensive cleaning, are difficult to sanitize, and can get soiled easily. In addition, repair costs would decrease by eliminating the frequent replacement of the fabric and foam on the current seats, and cleaning time would be reduced significantly. It is anticipated this project will take 1 year to complete, and the seat replacements will be performed by UTA personnel. The funding for the project will be covered by the CARES Act or through FEMA reimbursement. And this procurement will be conducted as an RFP, and vendor selection will be based on technical criteria in addition to price. I've asked Kyle Stockley to join me as well if you have any questions on that.
Well, one question I had, Kyle, is I'm assuming that either we or somebody else has tested this type of seat to kind of give us some comfort that it is in fact an easier cleaning solution as far as seats go.
Absolutely, and a lot of transit agencies across the country are either moving towards a similar project or wanting to go that in that direction, just for this reason.
Okay. Any questions for Kyle from the board? I know Carolyn's briefed us a number of times, and we concur that it's a good direction to go. So thank you.
Okay. And the next one is a procurement to purchase and install plexiglass barriers on 425 buses. These are the Gillig only buses at this point. This will provide a sanitary barrier and social distancing for the operators. This barrier will also provide a level of security for the operators not currently present. The installation will be performed by UTA personnel and is expected to be completed as quickly as possible and no later by the end of the year. This procurement will be conducted as an RFP, and vendor selection will be based on technical criteria in addition to price. And I believe we have a picture here to take a look at as well to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at here. This is the design that was presented from Gillig on these buses, and Kyle can also answer some questions on this.
Kyle, I know that there was a committee earlier because we were more concerned on the security side. And is this, I assume we came to a conclusion that this also provides that level of comfort for the operators that we had hoped to achieve?
Correct, and as you look at the picture, you'll see next to the yellow stanchion bar next to the fare box, there's a latch there that the operator can open and close, similar to a door. So that would act as a level of security, for those operators.
Okay, great. Any questions for Kyle?
I just had a question logistically. Why does it not go lower down? Just curious. Is that because of the structure of the way the bus is and then the mechanism to do the supports on it, or is there some other component?
As far as the design from Gillig, that's what they offer at this point. I haven't talked to them about that specific issue, but I can definitely reach out and find out why it stops about the bot or midway of the seat.
The seat, yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. Next one, Todd.
Okay, the next one, as Mary mentioned earlier, is the procurement for the design of a track station at 650 South Main. The architect or engineering firm selected will assist UTA in developing the design, bidding, and construction documents and specifications for this addition to the Blue Line. As she also mentioned, the Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency has asked to construct the previously planned 650 South track station on Main Street, and the city will be providing funding for the design and construction of the station. This procurement will also be conducted as an RFP. Vendor selection will be based on technical criteria in addition to price. Any questions on this one?
I don't see any, Todd.
Okay.
Next one.
And this last one is procurement to contract with a firm for consulting services to conduct an analysis of transit options for the Provo to Santa Quin corridor. The study will include a review of relevant past studies, demand for transit services, feasibility of a front runner extension, and consideration of a range of transit alternatives to identify the preferred transit projects to serve the corridor. The consultant will also propose alternative land use scenarios that best support transit in the community and will provide implementation strategies for short, medium, and long-range transit investments. Funding for this analysis will be shared 50-50 by UTA and Mountain Land Association of Governments. This procurement will be conducted as an RFP with vendor selection based on technical criteria in addition to price. And I have Laura Hanson here to join us to answer any questions.
Any questions for Laura? I think we're always anxious to see that go further south, so I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for those pre-procurements, Todd, and we'll go to a grant application with the U.S. Department of Transportation and Bill Grant, Mary DiLoretto.
Hello again. So we intend to submit a build grant application for double tracking from Frontrunner from Draper to South Jordan. And we would also are submitting for wayfinding for those stations, for the Draper Station, South Jordan Station, and the Vineyard Station. And this is through the USDOT build program. As we all know, that double tracking is key to double tracking key sections along the Frontrunner alignments are the first steps to making commuter rail system one that will grow to fill the transportation needs of the growing Wasatch Front from Ogden to Provo. Last year, we had submitted a build application to install the Vineyard Station, as well as some double tracking north of Vineyard and this portion from Draper to South Jordan. We heard back from the USDOT that this application ranked very highly, and they recommended that we should submit it again. While we have already started the Vineyard Station and we are doing the design for the Vineyard and the double tracking of Northern Utah County, we can't include that in this application, but we are going to show that it is part of this whole program to complete double tracking in this area. We are requesting a total of 40 million, where 20 would be federal and 20 million would be our local match. Part of our local match is about 2.5 million of right-of-way that we already own, and we would have to program the remaining local match for this project. Any questions?
Any questions from the board? Let's see, Kent, you're on mute.
Yeah, I guess, Mary, the fact that we've actually moved ahead with the Northern Utah County project, do you think that will even strengthen the application for this South Jordan to Draper?
Well, I think it will hurt and help to some extent. I think it will strengthen to show that, look, we've committed and we're starting. It might hurt, though, because we can't use all the benefits from that project in this application.
Okay.
Any other questions? We certainly are crossing our fingers, Mary, and it'd be wonderful to have that added resource. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll next go to our discussion items and on the UTA 2019 onboard survey report. We have Nicole Bordeaux, and I think you're going to be joined by GJ Labonte as part of this. Nicole?
Great, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll be joined with GJ Labonte, who is the Customer Experience Manager. So today we're presenting the summary of the onboard survey that was conducted in September through December of 2019. We'll present just a brief highlights of the data from our riders, and this is, of course, before the pandemic, and this is a survey that was taken from our tracks and bus and Frontrunner riders. But before we begin, I'd like to just mention that now we will be conducting a new survey to launch next week with our employees as well as our riders to understand our current context. So we're going to give you what was the pre-pandemic, but we're also going to be looking at our riders to get the demographics and kind of a current situation. So we should have that information available at the end of May. But so we want to do kind of a post and a pre. But now, next slide, please. Thank you. And you can go to the next one also. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about our onboard survey, and really federal regulations require transit agencies to do a passenger survey at least every 5 years. UTA's last survey was in 2015, and the purpose of the survey is to really get a demographic profile of your non-minority riders compared to your minority riders. UTA also collects origin and destination data. Next slide, please. And the federal regulations and looking at Title VI has a minimum of data requirements like race, national origin, language other than English spoken, household income, And then again, UTA takes this opportunity to really get an collective idea of demographics from our riders. So we do 13 additional profile questions, such as driver license status, number of vehicles in the household, student status, if persons with disabilities, and trip purposes. So I'm going to turn the time over to DJ so he can give you some of the highlights of our data, and we can go on from there. Next slide, please. Thank you. DJ?
Yep. Good morning, trustees. As Nicole mentioned, what we're going to do here today is just glean some of the higher level facts that we saw as interesting from the survey. You should have received a copy of the full report in your packets. It'll have more detailed charts and data regarding some of these points that I'm going to make today. So feel free, after you've had a chance to review that, to share any questions with us as well. So one of the first things was the ridership breakdown. The 60%, 40% male to female ratio is about the same as it has been. We started these surveys, or we had these surveys recorded back as far as 2011. This ratio just hasn't changed. This survey this year was the first time that we introduced an option for some of the surveyees to choose other as an option. It was less than 0.5%, but we expect that percentage to grow in future surveys. The 60-40% split also is indicative of the state's workforce split as well. So there's no surprises there. The age of our average riders, or the average age of our riders, remains the largest under 44. And 61% of our riders are under the age of 35. The median age in Utah is 31 years old. So that, again, is no surprise to see that large percentage there. Next slide. Race. This, again, much like the gender split, has remained consistent through the last few surveys that we've conducted. One of the more interesting statistics was the Kim Gardner Institute had conducted a 2019 report called Utah's Increasing Diversity. And in that study, they determined that between 2015 and 2019, the Asian population in the state of Utah had grown by 18%. And so you can see that reflected in this increase in our own ridership here. Income, riders, 50% of our riders earn less than $40,000 a year. And even bigger jump was the riders earning less than $10,000 grew by 7% since 2015. One of the more interesting statistics that we saw in this survey, riders earning more than $150,000, and it's a small percentage of our ridership. It's only about 5% of our total riders, grew by 10%. So we're picking up a larger market share of high earners. Next slide. Vehicles per household, another indicator for transit usage. Since 2015, there's been a decline of the zero-car households, which is not the direction we like to see that particular statistic going, especially when the household with 4 or more vehicles is growing. And the other indicator for transit ridership is
what's referred to as the captive riders, riders that had no other option besides transit for their trip. And we carry 53% of the riders who have no other option. Again, this has declined by 2% since 2015, which if you look at the statistic above, there was prosperity. People had options and access to more vehicles. It'll be interesting to see what the post-COVID climate looks like. Next slide.
GJ, question for you. Did in the earlier surveys, did you at all, did they all at all track their destination location?
Yes, and I have a slide at the end here that'll talk about that. And again, these are very, very high level data points that I'm sharing, and I'm happy to go as deep as you would like to into the geographic analysis or any of those.
I'll wait till you get to that point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. Frequency. This was an interesting statistic that came out of this year's survey. The riders using the system 6 days a week has gone up 2%. And I think, as Laura mentioned earlier on in this meeting, it may be indicative of the shift workers that are using the system 6 out of 7 days of the week. And that, again, has gone up 2% since 2015. And then transfers. And the transfers since 2015 with trips taking 2 or more transfers went up by 4%. And if you're familiar at all with the stigma associated with transfers, it's people are more reluctant to take trips with 1, 2, and definitely not 3 transfers. But to see this increase with 2 or more by 4% is, I think, indicative of the redesign of the system in the August 2019 change day. We've given riders more options in span of service, frequency, connections, and made the transfers more tolerable or palatable. Next slide. Access and egress. These 4 means of getting to and from our system, again, have not changed at all. Less than 1% since across all the surveys in the past few years. They all 4 account for 97% of access and egress to all of our trips. Walking has always been our highest percentage of people getting to and from our system. Drove alone and parked. Again, that's more indicative of the introduction of our rail system. Dropped off and picked up by someone. The kiss and ride model, again, is been a big part of our access and egress. And then personal bike has remained in the top 4 over the last few years. Again, people will ask, well, what about the first mile, last mile solutions, scooters, bike sharing, Lyft, Uber? They account for less than 1% of the access and egress. But again, since the last survey was over 5 years ago, we expect that to continue to climb. And then we'll also start introducing the VIA service, the microtransit service. Next slide.
GJ, before you go to the next slide,
sure.
Could you go to the previous slide?
Sure.
You talked about the transfers option. Do you think that education passes and increased access to institutions like universities, could that have changed the number of transfers? Is that, because it still looks like it went down, but yet if they're getting on and they're going to say on the UVX or something else, that seems like that would be a transfer. So I was just curious.
Right. So that would typically be a 1 transfer trip if they came in on Front Runner and used UVX to get to school. But yeah, that's one of the data points I can certainly dig into and find out, because we know where their destinations were, and I can easily pull that out.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to ask a question on that. Thank you.
Good point. It's the trip purpose would be the statistic I would combine with this. to try and see if it's more students or commuters going to work. And I'm okay. We did this one. Okay. This is the slide I was referring to, Trustee Christensen. So productions and attractions are origins and destinations don't necessarily tell the full picture, because you may catch a commuter or a student going home to their after their workday, and so the origin would have been their place of work or school. So we flip the trips around to just make sure that we're understanding how the actual production and the attraction of the trips are working. On the left side is the production. The two areas that I've highlighted should make sense. It's the Central Business District in Salt Lake City and the University of Utah. And they trips that are produced and end in that particular area represent 20% of our ridership. And similarly, down in the Provo-Orem area, again, the darker colors, 5,000 or more trips produced or attracted, they represent about 10% of our total trips in the system here. And again, the primary attractors for these things are the universities, the central business districts, and the major employment centers. So you see places like West Valley and South Salt Lake County.
It would be interesting if you have this from 2015 to do an overlay, just to see the evolution of places, points of employment and how they've changed.
Sure.
Thinking back to your number of cars in a household kind of number, and I think part of the challenge, I just think back to my early working career when most folks came into the downtown area of Salt Lake, basically. That trip has gone almost like a spider, depending on sometimes along the line of work. And I think that number of cars actually probably reflect that a little bit.
Right. And you can see that the lower or lighter shaded areas are where the people are that would have more cars, 2, 3, and 4 per household, with more mobility to get down to get to the employment centers. But yeah, I can do that. I can do a 15 to 19 comparison.
TJ, I just had another question. Just when you're having that dialogue, I had this thought occurred to me, talking about regional work centers and where those growth patterns are. Does any of our service, how does that parallel with like freeways and the typical UDOT access points? I guess that was just a question I would ask. I don't know if there's ever been any data, but just was curious if we're also reaching those same regional workspaces or living locations, whatever.
Are you asking how we stand up against the freeway access to these employment centers?
Yes.
Okay. We traditionally don't carry a whole lot of the total trips. I think there's somewhere around 10 million trips, and we carry about 2% of those. So I can look at it. That statistic has not changed a whole lot. It's gone up maybe 1% or 2% since we introduced the rail systems. But yeah, the car is still king. I don't know if that answered your question.
In a way, thanks. And I was kind of thinking of it more along the lines of, are we maximizing access in our own system to these regional work centers? And I probably should have worded it more like that.
Oh, yes, I think we are. I think that's the role of the service planning group. And I'm actually excited and looking forward to what some of the things that are revealed from this time are. I was looking at the statistics early on in this presentation while Laura was talking about the routes that she has seen grow or remain solid. So I think that's the best outcome for this, is that we can really see who we are serving, where we really should be focusing our higher quality, more frequent service.
Thanks. That's helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Let's see, JJ, did you have more slides, or are you
That's it.
coming?
Next slide. Next slide, my farewell.
Farewell. Well, excellent. Any remaining questions for either Nicole or GJ? Nicole, did you have anything else, or?
No, I don't have anything else to add, just that we'll
Okay.
have new data about the current situation that we'll be able to overlay it and provide the service planning team with, so they can look at current and future data. So
Great.
I just want to add something in. There's a lot of information in here. When Laura was talking about the routes that have remained fairly solid during this time frame, is just really taking a look at our choice ridership and what isn't, and we can cross section that by where people are coming from and what's going on. So I think there's a lot more data in here than the time frame allowed GJ to show, particularly in terms of how many vehicles are in the household, who actually does not have a vehicle to take trips. And we didn't give a lot of data on that in terms of it, but I think it's something that we'll be able to use in the future, who exactly where those people are. And then also by trip purpose. We didn't get too much into trip purpose as well, either, and into this presentation. It's all in the report, but I think there's going to be a lot of ways we can use this information as well as any new information to move forward. So I think it's timely, because it pretty much tells what our market was most recently before the pandemic.
Yeah, this survey was completed in December of 2019, so it literally is just right on the cusp of pre-COVID. But yes, please take the report, and if you come up with those kind of cross tabulations that you'd like to see of captive riders by route, we can do that. There's any number of configurations of data we can come up with.
Right. So I just want to understand, there's a large data source now that we can use, our team will be using. If there's any questions that you have, let us know.
Well, I think, Carolyn, as we sort of figure out the new norm, bring back little components of that study for other discussion is certainly a valid thing. And I don't think the study has to stay just there. I mean, it would be great to have some of those side discussions too.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that onboard surveys give you a lot of data to build on and to continue to use, regardless of the report that it produces. It's the usefulness of the data.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that update, and we'll look forward to those other discussions as we go forward.
Thank you.
Note that our other business is our meeting on May the 6th. We also have a closed session to discuss for a strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation, and during that closed session we'll take leave from this particular WebEx session and join that in a different way, and then come back for adjournment. I'll take a vote here in a second. We'll reconvene for that closed session at about 11:10. That'll give folks a chance to take a short break, but ask that you be prompt for that closed session. And with that, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. We go into closed session.
Second.
I have a motion from Beth, seconded by Kent. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes, and we'll go into our closed session and join that session at 11:10. Thank you. Okay. We've returned from our closed session, and it brings us to the final action, which is adjournment. I'll entertain a motion to that end.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, staff, for great job.
Thanks, guys. Great work.
Thank you, everyone.